In a far corner of the galaxy where even light seemed tired of traveling, there existed a cold planet made of silver-colored stone and black dust. It was home to a race of intelligent aliens who had built their world with steel and machines. Everything on that planet was about order, progress, and control. They had once ruled hundreds of other worlds, their technology far ahead of anyone else. But power had made them proud, and pride had made them cruel. Long ago, before machines took over, these aliens had relied on living creatures for protection. Among them was a powerful reptilian species, large, intelligent, and strong enough to crush metal with their jaws. Their scales shimmered like gemstones, and their breath could melt rock. They were once treated as the guardians of the alien empire. Every ruler had one by their side. But as time passed, the aliens stopped believing in living protectors. They made robotic beasts instead, faster, stronger, and easier to control. And so the old reptilian guardians were left behind. In the center of that planet stood a dark, forgotten facility, once a breeding and training ground for these creatures. Now it was nothing but silence, filled with empty cages and the smell of rust. Inside one of those cages, deep underground, lay the last of her kind, a massive female reptile with scales that still glowed faintly green even in the dark. Her breathing was slow, weak. Around her lay pieces of broken metal and scattered bones of old meals that never came again. In her arms, if one could call them that, she held a small hatchling no bigger than a cat, covered in dull, pale scales. The aliens had declared both of them obsolete biological weapons. The mother had been injured during the last war and could no longer fight. Her hatchling was considered useless, too weak to train, too small to survive. So they locked them both inside and cut off the food supply. They didn't even bother to end their suffering. They just left them there, to die quietly out of sight. For days, the mother reptile lay still, using her body to keep her baby warm. Every breath she took seemed heavier than the last. The child, weak and hungry, made small sounds, pressing its tiny snout against her chest. The mother would lift her head slowly and nudge it gently, making a low humming sound as if to say, "It's all right." But it wasn't all right. The air inside was thin, and the cold metal walls stole away their heat. She had once fought wars in open skies, flying through storms and breathing fire. Now she couldn't even stand. Every now and then, the echo of footsteps would pass outside the cell, alien guards going about their work. Their heavy boots made a rhythm that broke the silence for a moment, then vanished again. The mother reptile would lift her head when she heard them, her eyes faintly glowing red in the dark. She remembered how those same aliens had once cheered for her strength, admired her power. Now they didn't even look at her. To them, she was nothing more than a failed experiment. One of the guards once peeked inside through the glass wall and saw the dying mother. "Still alive?" he muttered in his alien tongue. His partner shrugged. "Doesn't matter. They'll be gone soon." The first guard laughed a little and walked away. The sound of their voices faded, leaving silence again. The reptile blinked slowly, her eyes full of quiet pain. She didn't understand their words, but she could feel their coldness. It was the same feeling she had known since the day they locked her here. Time had no meaning in that place. Days, weeks, or maybe months passed. It was impossible to tell. The mother's body grew thinner, her movements slower. Sometimes she would dream of the open fields of her home planet, a world filled with warm sunlight and wide skies. In those dreams, her kind lived freely, not as weapons, but as beings of nature. She dreamed of swimming through lava streams and hunting in the molten valleys. But every time she opened her eyes, she saw only the gray ceiling of her prison. Still, she refused to give up. Whenever her child made a sound, she would respond, softly touching it with her snout. That tiny creature was her only reason to live. She would let herself die only after knowing it was safe, though deep inside, she feared that day might never come. Outside, the alien workers often whispered rumors about the ancient beast kept in the lower levels. Some believed it was cursed. Others said it had the power to destroy the planet if ever freed. A few even claimed they had heard it whisper during the night. Most of them avoided going near its cell. The higher officials didn't care about superstitions. To them, the reptile was already forgotten. They were too busy building new weapons, creating new machines that could kill without rest or emotion. But one evening, when the facility lights dimmed and the metallic hallways went quiet, the mother reptile lifted her head again. A small vibration passed through the floor, distant thunder from the planet's electric storms. She stared at the hatchling nestled against her chest. Its little body barely moved, its breath faint. Her heart, though alien and different, felt something deeply familiar, a mother's fear. She knew the end was near. Her eyes closed for a moment, and a single tear, thick and glowing, faintly blue, slid down her scaled cheek and fell on the ground, steaming as it touched the cold metal. Somewhere above, lightning cracked across the sky, lighting up the towers of the alien city. The storm raged, but inside that cell the silence was heavier than ever. The reptile made a low, rumbling sound in her throat, a call that no one could understand. It was not anger. It was sorrow. The sound echoed faintly through the vents, reaching corners of the facility no one had entered for years. In another part of the base, a small group of younger aliens paused for a second when they heard it. "Did you hear that?" one asked. The other shook his head. "Probably the machines. They always make weird noises." They continued walking, unaware that it was the cry of a dying creature, one that had once fought for their survival. The night stretched on endlessly. The hatchling stirred again, opening its eyes for the first time in days. Its gaze met its mother's, glowing softly in the dark. The mother made a weak sound, lowering her head to nuzzle the baby one last time. Even in that hopeless place, she still gave warmth, still gave love. There was no food, no sunlight, no hope, only her heartbeat and the small breaths of her child. But somehow that was enough to keep her alive for one more night. No one in the facility knew that this simple act, a creature refusing to let her child die, would soon change everything. The universe had a strange way of watching the forgotten ones, and while the aliens above celebrated their progress, something deeper and older was still alive beneath their feet. A mother who had lost everything still clung to life for the sake of her young. If anyone had looked through that cell window that night, they might have seen something extraordinary. The mother's scales faintly pulsed with light, not from strength but from instinct. She was sharing her life force with her child, giving it every last bit of energy she had. It was an ancient gift of her kind, a secret the aliens never understood. She knew she wouldn't live much longer, but maybe, just maybe, her child would. The storm outside grew louder, lightning flashing across the alien sky. The wind howled through the metallic towers. In that cold and lifeless world, a heartbeat still echoed, slow, steady, defiant. The mother reptile closed her eyes again, resting her head beside her hatchling. She didn't need freedom nor revenge. She only needed one thing, for her child to open its eyes again in the morning. And somewhere, far away beyond that galaxy, destiny had already begun to move, preparing to send someone who would one day find them, someone who would see what the aliens never saw, life low. The morning after the storm, the alien base was silent again. The skies above had cleared, leaving a dim blue glow over the metallic planet. Inside the underground chamber, the air was cold and heavy. The mother reptile opened her eyes slowly, her vision blurry. The world around her looked the same, gray walls, flickering lights, and silence. But something inside her felt weaker than before. Her heart was beating slower, her breath shallower. She looked down at her hatchling lying still between her arms. For a terrifying moment, she thought it wasn't breathing. Panic rushed through her body. She nudged it gently, making a low humming sound. Then the small creature moved its head a little and made a tiny sound, weak but alive. The mother's heart calmed slightly. She licked its head softly with her rough tongue, trying to comfort it, though her own body trembled with exhaustion. The days in that prison had blurred together. There was no difference between morning or night. Only the flicker of lights told her that another day had passed. The mother had stopped hoping that food would come. She no longer wasted her strength roaring or clawing at the walls. The aliens didn't care. They had moved on. Sometimes a group of alien technicians passed by the corridor. They spoke in their strange mechanical voices, sometimes laughing, sometimes arguing about something the reptile couldn't understand. Once, a young alien stopped in front of her cell and stared at her for a long time. His face had a curious expression, as if he wanted to say something. But the older alien beside him barked an order and they both walked away. That was how it always was. A brief look, a small pause, then silence again. The mother reptile had learned to listen. When no one came, she listened to the hum of the machines and the sound of her child breathing. Sometimes she would move her wings just enough to block the cold air. Every movement hurt, but she didn't stop. Her scales had lost their shine. Cracks had appeared near her claws. But even in that state, there was still something strong about her. Something that couldn't be broken easily. The hatchling, small and weak, had started to open its eyes more often now. It looked around, curious but afraid. Its little head would rise, then drop again. It didn't know that it was trapped. It didn't know that its mother was dying. To it, the world was only the warmth of her body and the faint heartbeat beneath her chest. The mother often watched her baby sleep, remembering the old times and when her kind lived freely, not behind glass. She remembered flying through red skies with others like her, the sound of their roars echoing over mountains of molten stone. But now those memories felt like dreams from another lifetime. Sometimes she wondered if anyone from her kind still existed somewhere far away. But even if they did, they wouldn't come. This place was too far, too cold, and too forgotten. She knew she was the last one here. And when she was gone, her kind's story would end with her. But life has strange ways of surviving. That night, the hatchling moved again, a little stronger than before. It opened its mouth and made a sound, a soft growl that echoed faintly in the room. The mother tilted her head. She answered with a low tone of her own. For a moment, it almost felt like they were talking. It was small, but it gave her a reason to keep breathing. Above them, life in the alien base continued like nothing had changed. The aliens were busy working on their new creations, metallic creatures powered by artificial minds. They didn't need real blood anymore. They had machines that could fly and fight without fear or hunger. To them, the living beasts were a problem, too emotional, too unpredictable. They called them old-world weapons. But the truth was they had forgotten that life was not just about control. Inside the dark cell, the mother reptile's health kept declining. Her body was running out of strength. When she tried to move, her muscles burned. Still, she tried to stay strong for her baby. Every time the little one made a sound, she would respond with a small hum. Even in the silence of death, she wanted her child to feel safe. A few days later, one of the alien guards noticed something strange on his scanner. "Life signs still active," he said in his rough voice. "How is it not dead yet?" Another guard shrugged. "Those creatures are stubborn. Leave them. They'll die soon." They didn't bother to check. They didn't see that inside the mother was using her own life energy to feed her child. It was a rare ability, one that no alien science could explain. Her body was slowly giving away its strength to the baby so it could survive. Each day she grew weaker, and the hatchling grew stronger. The little one started to crawl around the cell, clumsy but curious. It nibbled at the old bones scattered on the ground and played with its mother's tail. She watched it with tired eyes, but also with quiet pride. In this lifeless place, her child was still full of movement. Still alive. That was enough for her. The aliens had no idea what was happening. They thought both creatures were slowly dying. They didn't realize that a bond far deeper than survival was keeping them alive. In that silence, there was something pure, something even the most advanced machines couldn't understand. Love. One night, when the base lights went dim and the corridors emptied, the mother lifted her head one last time. The hatchling was curled against her chest, asleep. She could feel its tiny heartbeat against her skin. She looked at it quietly, her glowing eyes softer than ever. She had nothing left to give except this, her warmth, her protection, her last breath. She didn't roar, didn't fight, didn't cry. She simply watched her baby and waited for dawn. And as she waited, a strange calm filled her heart. She knew she was fading, but she also knew that her story was not ending. Somehow, some way, someone would find her child. She didn't know who, but something deep inside told her that the universe wasn't done with them yet. Above her, lightning flashed again across the alien sky. The sound rumbled through the metal halls. The hatchling twitched and made a tiny noise, frightened by the sound. The mother hummed softly, comforting it. Her voice was weak, but the tone was still gentle. That was her final lullaby, a song of peace in a world that had forgotten kindness. Hours passed. The storm outside faded and the room grew colder. The hatchling stirred, pressing itself closer to her warmth. The mother's breathing slowed, each breath longer apart than the last. Then she exhaled one final time, deep and steady, and her body became still, but her story didn't end there. When the baby woke up again, the room was different. The air felt warmer, faintly glowing. The mother's scales shimmered one last time, releasing a soft green light that wrapped around the little one like a blanket. It didn't understand what had happened. It only felt safe, surrounded by the faint warmth of its mother's energy. That glow would stay with it for years to come, a gift from her hidden deep inside its body. Far above, the aliens continued their work without knowing that a miracle had taken place beneath their feet. They believed the creatures below were dead. They never checked the scanners again, but the hatchling was still alive, weak, alone, and frightened, but alive. For days it stayed close to its mother's still body, trying to nudge her awake. When nothing happened, it began to explore the corners of the cell, searching for food or water. It didn't find much, but sometimes drops of moisture formed on the walls from the planet's strange humidity. The hatchling licked them slowly, surviving one day at a time. No one in the entire galaxy would have believed that such a small creature, abandoned and starving, could last so long. But sometimes the smallest sparks are the ones that refuse to die. Somewhere, fate had already begun to move, quietly preparing to bring someone into that forgotten place. Someone who would one day open that cell, see the creature inside, and understand what it truly meant to survive. The aliens above didn't hear it, but in the silence of that underground room, the faint heartbeat of the hatchling continued, soft, steady, and full of life. It was the sound of hope, hidden beneath a world that had forgotten how to care. The alien planet had many secret facilities, but this one was different. It was hidden beneath the rocky surface, filled with old machines and forgotten experiments. The aliens rarely came down anymore. They had newer bases, newer projects, and this old place was now used only for storage and labor. It was in this forgotten base that a new group of prisoners arrived one cold morning. They were humans, captured from a nearby colony during an alien raid. Most were workers and scientists. The aliens didn't treat them cruelly, but they didn't treat them kindly either. To them, humans were just tools, good for fixing machines and doing small tasks that robots couldn't handle. Among those humans was a quiet man who once studied living creatures on different planets. Before being captured, he had worked in a small research station, studying alien species and their behavior. He was fascinated by life, by how even in the harshest places something always managed to survive. When the aliens took him, he didn't know if he'd ever see Earth again, but even here, surrounded by metal walls and strange sounds, his curiosity never died. The humans were given small sleeping quarters and were forced to work long hours repairing old machines. Every day felt the same. Wake up, work, eat a small meal, and sleep again. The only light came from the glowing blue lamps hanging over the corridors. The air smelled of oil and dust, but one thing caught the man's attention. A faint sound he heard one night while walking through an empty hallway. It was soft, almost like a weak growl mixed with a breath. At first he thought it was a broken vent or maybe an echo from the machinery, but when he passed the same hallway again the next night, he heard it again. A low, trembling sound coming from deep below the floor. It didn't sound like a machine. It sounded alive. Curiosity pushed him to look closer. The next day, while repairing a circuit near the lower levels, he noticed a small hatch at the end of the corridor, half covered in dust and forgotten wires. The aliens never went near it. When he asked one of them what it was, the alien simply said, "Old storage. Do not go there." But the tone of the alien's voice wasn't strict. It was uneasy, like even he didn't want to talk about it. That night, when everyone else was asleep, the man quietly slipped away. The corridors were dim, the lights flickering like tired stars. He walked slowly, careful not to make noise. When he reached the old hatch, he pushed it open. It creaked loudly, but no one heard him. A long, narrow stairway led down into darkness. The air below was colder, thicker. The deeper he went, the stranger it smelled, and not like machines or chemicals, but something older. The sound came again, faint but clearer now. It wasn't a growl anymore. It sounded like breathing, heavy, tired, and alive. He followed the sound until he reached a large door covered in dust and warning signs written in alien symbols. The metal was scratched, dented, and rusted. Through a small glass window, he saw movement. He leaned closer, his heart beating faster. Inside, something shifted in the shadows. Then, in the faint light, he saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at him. He froze. For a moment, neither moved. The creature was large, with scales that shimmered faintly in the dim light. But there was something else. A smaller shape curled beside it. The man realized it wasn't just one creature. There was a young one, too. The big one looked weak, its breathing slow and labored. The smaller one moved a little, pressing against its mother's still body. It took him a moment to understand the mother was dead. He stepped back, his heart heavy. The baby, small and thin, lifted its head slightly and made a faint sound. It wasn't a roar. It sounded more like a cry, soft and lost. He pressed his hand against the glass without thinking. The baby tilted its head and stared at him. For a few seconds, time seemed to stop. He didn't know what kind of creature it was, but he saw something in its eyes that no machine or alien had. Pain, confusion, and loneliness. He whispered softly, though he knew it couldn't understand. "You're still alive." The next day, he couldn't stop thinking about what he saw. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept going back to that small creature trapped alone in the cold cell. The aliens didn't talk about it, and no one seemed to care. But he couldn't ignore it. Something inside him told him that if he didn't help, no one would. That night, he went back again. This time, he brought a small piece of food he had saved from his own meal. He approached the cell quietly and placed the food near the glass. The little creature moved closer, sniffing the air. Its eyes glowed softly in the dim light. It hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached the food with its small claws and ate it. The man smiled faintly. For the first time since he arrived on this planet, he felt something good, something human. Every night after that, he returned secretly. He would bring scraps of food, drops of water, or even just sit there in silence. The little creature began to recognize him. When he came near, it would lift its head and make a small sound, not of fear but of greeting. Its movements became stronger, its eyes brighter. He studied it quietly, noticing how it would sometimes look at its mother's still body and then back at him, as if searching for answers. He wanted to open the cell, but the locks were too complex, and he knew the aliens would notice if he tried. So he did the only thing he could. He kept visiting. Weeks passed. The creature began to grow. Its scales became brighter, its tail longer. It would press its small claws against the glass whenever it saw him, making a soft tapping sound. The man would press his hand on the other side. Somehow that silent connection gave both of them strength. The aliens never noticed. They were too focused on their new weapons and machines. The base had many empty sections, and the cell where the creature lived was long forgotten. But destiny has its ways. The bond between the human and the young reptile was slowly building into something the universe itself seemed to protect. One night, while he sat near the glass, he whispered softly, "You shouldn't be here. You deserve the sky." The creature tilted its head, watching him carefully. Its eyes reflected the faint light from the ceiling, glowing like tiny stars. He didn't know if it understood, but it stayed close, as if it liked hearing his voice. The air around the base grew colder over the next few weeks. The storms outside became more violent. The facility shook sometimes when thunder hit nearby. The man began to worry. He didn't know how long he could keep visiting before the aliens found out. But he couldn't stop. Every night, when everything else was silent, he went back to the cell. It had become the only place where he still felt alive. One night, as he sat near the glass, the creature suddenly pressed its snout against it and made a soft, rumbling sound. It was the same sound its mother used to make, a low hum that meant comfort. The man froze, then smiled. Somehow, in its own way, the creature was trying to thank him. He didn't say anything for a while. He just sat there watching it breathe, watching its small chest rise and fall. In that moment, the walls around them didn't matter. The planet didn't matter. It was just one human and one young creature, both alone, both surviving in a place that had forgotten what kindness meant. He didn't know it yet, but what he started that night would soon change everything, not just for him, but for the entire base. Because sometimes one small act of compassion is enough to wake something much greater, something that refuses to stay buried forever. And as he left the dark corridor that night, the little creature watched him go, its eyes glowing faintly, filled with trust for the first time in its short life. The man couldn't stop thinking about the creature. Every day when he worked among machines, his mind wandered back to that dark room deep underground, to the little reptile waiting in silence. He knew it was dangerous to keep visiting, but he also knew he couldn't stop now. The creature trusted him, and in a place where everything felt cold and lifeless, that trust meant something. He started to plan his visits carefully. The aliens had strict schedules. Lights dimmed at the same time every night, and their patrols followed a pattern. He learned which guards passed by which hallway, how long they stayed near the control room, and which cameras were broken. The more he learned, the easier it became to move unseen. One night after finishing his shift, he took a small container of water and a few food scraps from the storage room. His hands trembled a little as he hid them under his jacket. If he got caught, the aliens wouldn't show mercy, but he reminded himself of the creature's eyes, how they looked at him not with fear but with hope. That thought gave him courage. The corridors were quiet when he reached the lower level. He moved slowly, listening to the hum of the machines and the faint whistle of the air vents. When he reached the door to the creature's cell, he stopped for a moment, catching his breath. Then he placed his hand against the cold glass. The small reptile appeared from the shadows almost immediately. Its movements were quicker now, its eyes brighter than before. It made a soft sound, pressing its snout against the glass. The man smiled and sat down on the floor just outside the door. "I'm back," he whispered quietly as if speaking to a friend. He placed the small food near the bottom of the glass. The creature sniffed and quickly ate, its tail flicking lightly behind it. Then it looked at him again, making a low humming sounding, almost like a purr. He watched, amazed at how much it had grown. It wasn't just surviving. It was becoming stronger. Over the next few weeks, their silent friendship deepened. The creature began to recognize his footsteps even before he reached the cell. It would move closer, waiting. Sometimes it would mimic his gestures, tilting its head when he did or moving its claws when he raised his hand. He found himself talking to it softly, not because it could understand, but because it made him feel less alone. "You're a brave one," he said one night, smiling faintly. "You shouldn't be in a place like this." The creature blinked slowly, its glowing eyes fixed on him. For a moment he imagined it understood, but danger was always close. One night, while he was returning from the lower level, he noticed two alien guards standing near the control panel, talking in low voices. One of them mentioned unusual movement in the lower scanners. His heart skipped a beat. Were they talking about him? Or the creature? He walked past them calmly, pretending to carry tools, but his mind was racing. That night he didn't sleep. He kept thinking about what would happen if they discovered the creature was alive. The aliens might decide to destroy it. To them, it was just an outdated experiment. He couldn't let that happen. Over the next few days, he became more careful. He reduced his visits, only going when it was completely safe. Each time he checked for changes, cameras, sensors, guards. He noticed that the cell's power systems were slowly failing. The temperature inside was dropping, and the air vents were making strange noises. The creature had started to shiver slightly. He knew it wouldn't last much longer like this. Something had to be done. One night he stood in front of the glass and whispered, "I'll find a way to help you. I promise." The creature tilted its head and let out a small sound as if answering him. It pressed its claws against the glass, leaving faint marks that shimmered in the dim light. The man decided to study the cell locks more closely. He noticed that the system was connected to an old power grid, one that hadn't been updated in years. The aliens had abandoned this section long ago, meaning security might not be as strong here as elsewhere. If he could reroute the power or unlock the panel from the maintenance room, he could open the door. But he needed to do it carefully. He spent his next few shifts observing the control systems, pretending to fix wires and check data. In truth, he was memorizing the codes and power routes. He found that the cell door was connected to a small terminal in the lower maintenance hall, one that barely worked. That could be his chance. When he returned to the cell that night, he sat down again near the glass. The creature moved close, resting its head against the barrier. He reached out and placed his hand against the same spot. "Soon," he whispered. "Just a little longer." The days passed slowly. The air in the lower levels became colder and the lights flickered more often. The base was old, and the storms outside were making the power unstable. Sometimes the man worried the system would fail completely, trapping the creature forever. He couldn't wait much longer. Finally, one night, the opportunity came. A massive storm hit the planet. The entire base shook as lightning struck nearby. The lights flickered and went out for a few seconds. The alarms didn't sound and the aliens were used to storms. But the power surge had knocked out half the systems. He saw his chance. He ran through the corridors carrying a small tool he had stolen earlier, something he could use to override the old terminal. When he reached the lower hall, he saw sparks flickering from broken wires. The terminal lights were dim but still working. He began to type, his fingers shaking. The system was ancient, full of strange alien symbols. He didn't understand them all, but he had seen enough to guess which ones controlled the locks. As he worked, sweat ran down his face. He knew the aliens might notice if the door suddenly opened, but he couldn't stop now. The creature's life was worth the risk. Finally, the screen flashed, and the sound of a heavy lock echoed through the corridor. He froze, then from behind him he heard a slow creak. The cell door was opening. He turned around and saw the creature standing in the doorway, blinking in confusion. Its wings unfolded slightly, its tail brushing the floor. For the first time it was free. He didn't move. He just stood there, breathing heavily, watching it take its first steps outside the cage. The creature looked at him, its eyes glowing softly. It didn't attack, didn't run. It simply stared, then made a low humming sound. The same sound it used when it was calm. "You're free now," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Go," but the creature didn't go. It moved closer instead, lowering its head slightly. He could feel its breath, warm and real. Then gently it nudged his arm with its snout. It was a small gesture, but it said everything. Before he could say anything else, the alarm suddenly came to life. The aliens had noticed the power disturbance. Red lights flashed across the hallways. The creature flinched, turning its head sharply. He knew they had only minutes before the guards arrived. He pointed toward the old ventilation shaft at the end of the corridor. "That way," he whispered urgently. The creature looked, then back at him, unsure. He nodded, waving his hand. "Go, please." It hesitated, then slowly began to move. Its claws scraped against the floor, its wings folding tightly against its body as it crawled into the shaft. The man sighed with relief, then turned to fix the terminal, trying to erase his trace. When he glanced back one last time, the creature had disappeared into the darkness. The hallway was empty again, except for the faint smell of dust and the echo of distant alarms. He stood there for a few seconds, breathing deeply. He didn't know what would happen next. Maybe the creature would escape into the wild. Maybe it would be caught. But at least now it had a chance. And that was enough. As the aliens rushed toward the lower levels, he quietly walked back to his quarters, his heart still racing. He knew what he had done was dangerous. If they found out, he would be punished. But when he closed his eyes that night, he saw the creature's glowing eyes and heard its soft sound of gratitude. And for the first time since he arrived on that planet, he slept with a small, peaceful smile, knowing he had done something good in a place that had forgotten what kindness was. The man woke up the next morning with a strange feeling in his chest. The storm outside had finally passed, but something inside him felt unsettled. The memory of what he did the previous night still echoed in his mind, unlocking the cell, watching the creature walk into the dark passage. He had freed it, but was it safe? Had it survived? All day he tried to act normal. He worked in silence, repairing the same machines, answering questions when asked. The aliens seemed restless. Their voices were sharp, their movements faster than usual. Something was wrong. Later that afternoon, a group of alien officers entered the control room. He could hear them arguing in their strange language. Though he couldn't understand every word, he caught enough to realize they were angry about something missing. Something from the lower levels. His hands froze over the tools. His heartbeat quickened. They had discovered the empty cell. He forced himself to stay calm. When one of the aliens barked an order, he nodded quickly and returned to work, pretending not to hear. He knew any sign of nervousness could make them suspicious. For the rest of the day, he avoided looking at the security panels. But when the shift ended and everyone left, he stayed behind for a few minutes. Carefully, he opened one of the smaller screens and searched for the camera feeds from the lower vents. The system flickered with static. Most of the cameras were still offline from the storm. He kept scrolling, and then he froze. For a brief second, one of the side cameras showed a blurry figure, something moving through the outer tunnels near the surface. The image was faint, but he recognized the glowing eyes. It was the creature. It had made it out. He let out a small sigh of relief. The creature was alive. That was all that mattered. But his relief didn't last long. A few moments later, the image flickered again, this time showing 3 alien patrol drones flying over the same area. They were scanning the tunnels. The aliens were hunting it. His chest tightened. He knew what those drones were capable of. If they found the creature, they'd report its location instantly. He couldn't let that happen. That night, while everyone slept, He went to the edge of the compound where the storm barriers met the rocky desert. The sky outside was a deep violet, filled with silent flashes of distant lightning. The air smelled of dust and metal. He stepped carefully through the outer gates, which had been damaged slightly by the storm. The aliens rarely patrolled there. Too much static interference made their sensors weak. He walked slowly, using a small torch to light his way. He didn't know exactly where to look, but he followed the direction of the tunnels he'd seen on the screen. His boots crunched against the gravel. The planet's wind was cold, almost biting, and it carried a strange, sharp sound, like distant cries mixed with the hum of the machines buried beneath the surface. After walking for nearly an hour, he noticed something ahead, a faint trail in the sand, large claw-like prints leading toward the rocks. His heart lifted. He followed the trail carefully until he reached a small cave hidden between the ridges. The air inside was warmer, filled with a soft humming sound. When he stepped closer, his torchlight caught two shapes. The larger one moved first, the creature he had freed. It looked stronger now, standing tall with its wings folded neatly against its back. But beside it something smaller stirred. He blinked in surprise. There was another, a young one. It was tiny, about the size of a cat, with glowing scales and bright eyes that blinked curiously at the light. The smaller creature tilted its head and made a soft chirping sound, almost musical. He stood frozen at the entrance, unable to move. The larger creature looked at him not with fear or anger, but with recognition. It made the same gentle hum it always did when he visited the cell. He slowly lowered the torch and knelt down, showing he meant no harm. "You made it," he whispered softly. "You survived." The creature blinked, then stepped closer, its tail brushing against the cave wall. The small one followed, staying close to its parent. When the larger creature stopped in front of him, it bent its head slightly, a gesture that felt like gratitude. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Not only had it survived, it had protected its young all this time. The baby looked healthy, its scales shimmering softly in the dark. The thought made his heart ache. All those days the aliens thought they were worthless, yet they had a life of their own. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. The cold wind outside couldn't touch the quiet warmth in that cave, but peace never lasted long in that place. He suddenly noticed a faint red light flickering on the rocks outside, a scanning beam. One of the patrol drones was near. He turned off his torch immediately and held his breath. The creature tensed, its body lowering protectively over the young one. The red light moved across the rocks, then stopped right at the cave entrance. The man could hear the faint whirring of the drone outside, its mechanical sensors scanning for heat. He knew what would happen if it found them. He looked around quickly, searching for something. There was a broken piece of metal near his foot, part of an old container. Quietly, he picked it up and threw it as far as he could in the opposite direction. The sound of the metal hitting the rocks echoed across the valley. The drone turned sharply, its red light shifting toward the noise. After a few seconds, it flew away in that direction, disappearing into the stormy horizon. He let out a long breath, his heart pounding. The creature slowly relaxed, lowering its wings again. "That was close," he whispered, wiping the sweat from his face. The larger creature looked at him again, those glowing eyes full of intelligence. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Two beings from different worlds, both abandoned by the same cruel system, now sharing a strange bond in the middle of nowhere. He knew he couldn't stay long. The aliens would continue searching, and if they noticed his absence, they'd suspect something. But he also couldn't leave them defenseless. He took off his jacket and placed it gently near the young creature, covering it from the cold. Then he took out a small pack of energy bars he'd hidden in his pocket. "It's not much," he said softly, "but it'll help." The larger creature watched quietly, its tail slowly sweeping the ground. Before leaving, he whispered, "I'll come back tomorrow night. Stay hidden, don't move toward the lights." He slowly backed out of the cave and stepped into the cold air again. The sky above was now brighter. Faint stars glimmered through the purple clouds. He looked once more toward the cave before turning back. He couldn't explain why, but a strange feeling grew in his chest, a mixture of pride and sadness. The next few nights, he returned with more food and supplies, small things he could hide from the storage without being noticed. Each time the creature greeted him calmly. The baby began to recognize him too, chirping softly when he arrived. It even tried to mimic his movements, tilting its head or stretching its tiny wings when he smiled. Those quiet moments became the only thing that kept him going. But inside the alien base, tension was rising. The officers were furious about losing one of their specimens. They ordered full checks of every worker, including humans. Rumors spread that someone had tampered with the old cells. The man knew his time was running out. One mistake, one wrong move, and everything would be over. Then one evening, just before he left for his shift, something unexpected happened. A strange noise echoed through the outer fields, a low, distant rumble that wasn't thunder. The aliens ran toward the observation deck, alarmed. Through the glass, he saw something huge moving across the horizon. It was the creature, the adult, flying low across the plains. Its wings shimmered under the lightning flashes, its movements powerful and graceful. The aliens shouted in panic, rushing to their systems. They didn't expect to see their lost experiment alive, let alone flying freely. He could hear them yelling orders, activating scanners, and sending drones. But what they didn't realize was that the creature wasn't attacking. It was leading them away, drawing their attention far from the cave where the young one was hidden. He watched in awe. Even in danger, it protected its child. Something deep inside him broke. He couldn't stay silent anymore. The aliens treated life like it was disposable, but he had seen what compassion and freedom could do, even for something they called a monster. That night, while chaos filled the base, he made a choice that would change everything. He entered the main power chamber and began rerouting the systems. If he could disable the tracking grid and communication link, the aliens wouldn't be able to find the creature again. It would be free, truly free. It was risky. He didn't know if he'd survive it, but he didn't care anymore. When the power suddenly flickered and alarms started to fail, he looked out the window one last time. In the distance, through the purple storm clouds, he saw a flash of wings, glowing faintly like a promise. And in that moment, he smiled. He didn't know what the future would bring. But he knew this, and somewhere out there, beyond the cold walls of the alien base, two beings that were once forgotten had a chance to live again. And that made everything worth it. Years had passed since that night when the man rerouted the power systems and watched the alien base fall into confusion. Time had changed everything. The skies above that cold planet no longer glowed with red storms, and the metallic towers that once hummed with alien energy now stood silent, covered in dust and rust. After the great storm and the power collapse, most of the aliens abandoned the outpost. Their technology had failed, their control over the area lost. The human workers were left behind, and eventually, they found a way to escape too. Some through stolen shuttles, others through the ruins of their master's own machines. The man, however, had chosen to stay behind for a while longer. He couldn't explain why, but his heart wouldn't let him leave just yet. Maybe it was because of the memories, of the creature, the little one, the nights in the cave. Or maybe it was because a part of him still felt responsible for what had happened there. He rebuilt a small shelter near the cliffs, using old materials left from the alien base. It wasn't much, but it gave him warmth and peace. For the first time in years, he didn't live in fear. He grew small plants in containers, collected rainwater, and fixed broken parts of machines just to keep his hands busy. Sometimes at night, when the sky turned violet, he would step outside and stare at the stars. They reminded him of freedom, the kind he had seen in the creature's eyes that last night. He wondered if it was still alive. If the young one had survived, he had no way of knowing. Years went by quietly. The storms became weaker. The planet slowly began to heal. The air grew clearer, and patches of green started to appear in the valleys. It was as if nature was reclaiming what had been lost. The man aged too. His hair turned gray and his hands carried small scars from his years of work. But his eyes still had that same spark, the one that came from witnessing something rare and true. One evening, as the twin suns dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, he sat outside his shelter, watching the wind move across the plains. Everything was still, peaceful, and then suddenly the silence broke. A faint sound, low, distant, like a deep vibration in the air, echoed across the valley. He frowned, looking up. The ground beneath him trembled softly, Then from far above the cliffs a shadow moved across the light. At first he thought it was a storm cloud, but then it shifted again, larger, faster, and with wings. His breath caught. It couldn't be. He stood up slowly, eyes wide, as the shadow circled lower and lower. The air rushed past him, dust swirling in waves. Then he saw it clearly. The glowing scales, the powerful wings. The familiar shape that had never left his memory. The creature. It was even more magnificent than before. Larger. Stronger, its wings stretching wide across the sky. And as it landed on the rocky ground not far from his shelter, he could see the faint golden light reflecting off its body. For a moment he couldn't move. His heart raced like it hadn't in years. The creature looked at him, its eyes glowing softly. The same eyes he had once seen through the glass of a cold alien cell. He took a step forward. His voice trembled when he spoke. You came back." The creature tilted its head slightly, making a deep, calm sound that vibrated in the air. A sound of recognition. It moved closer, slow and steady, until it stood only a few steps away. Its presence was warm and powerful, yet peaceful. The man could see every detail now. The scars on its wings, the faint marks of time, and yet, a strength that was beyond anything he'd ever known. He reached out his hand, trembling, unsure if it would still trust him after all those years. But the creature leaned down gently, pressing its snout against his palm. A wave of emotion flooded through him. He smiled, a soft, tearful smile. "You remember me." The creature let out a quiet hum, the same sound it used to make long ago, back when it was trapped and he would visit in the dark. But before he could say more, another sound reached his ears, lighter, higher. He turned his head. Behind the large creature, from the shadows of the cliffs, several smaller shapes appeared. He blinked in surprise. There were 3 of them, smaller, younger. Their wings not yet fully grown, their eyes bright like tiny stars. They moved playfully, curious and fearless. One of them made a small chirping noise, similar to the baby he had once seen in that cave so many years ago. He realized then what he was seeing. They were its offspring. The man slowly knelt down as one of the young ones stepped closer, sniffing curiously at his boots. Its scales shimmered with soft blue light, reflecting the twin sun's glow. Another one tilted its head and let out a short trill, almost like laughter. He laughed softly too, a sound he hadn't made in a long time. "So this is your family," he whispered, looking up at the adult creature. "You brought them here." The large creature's eyes softened. It bent its head slightly as if confirming his words. The man felt a lump in his throat. He didn't know why it had come back after all these years. Maybe it remembered the promise he made. Maybe it wanted to show him that life had continued, that hope hadn't died in that cold cell. The young ones wandered around his shelter, exploring the old metal walls and empty containers. One of them even tried to bite a loose wire, making a small spark that startled it. The man chuckled and gently shooed it away. "They're just like kids," he said softly. As night began to fall, the adult creature lifted its head and looked toward the horizon. The stars began to appear one by one, and the air grew cooler. The young ones gathered close to their parent, curling near its wings. The man sat beside them, feeling a deep calm settle over him. For a long time, neither he nor the creature moved. There was no need for words. The silence between them was full of meaning. He remembered everything, the fear, the secret visits, the risk, the hope. And now, seeing them alive, free, and thriving, it made everything worth it. At one point, the creature turned its head toward him again and let out a soft, melodic call. He didn't understand the sound, but he could feel what it meant. Gratitude. He smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "You saved me too, back then. I had lost faith in everything. You gave me something to believe in again." The creature blinked slowly as if understanding. For a long time, they just sat together under the stars, a man and the beings he once rescued, connected by something greater than words. As the night deepened, the young ones finally fell asleep beside their parent. The creature looked down at them with a tenderness that made the man's chest ache. Even in a world that had once been cruel and lifeless, love had found a way to exist. Before dawn, when the horizon started glowing faintly blue, the creature stood. It stretched its wings wide, preparing to leave. The man understood. They didn't belong here anymore. The world was big and they were meant to fly free. He stood too, watching silently. The creature looked at him one last time, eyes glowing softly in the pale light. It made that same low hum, deep, peaceful, and full of warmth. He raised his hand slowly. "Go," he said softly. "The sky is yours." The creature gave a gentle sound in reply, then lifted off the ground. The wind rushed past him warm and powerful. The young ones followed, their small wings flapping clumsily at first, then catching the air perfectly. They rose higher and higher until they were only shadows against the brightening sky, free, untamed, and alive. The man stood there long after they disappeared beyond the clouds. The wind carried a faint echo of their song, a sound that seemed to fill the whole sky. He smiled quietly to himself. The world felt lighter, warmer somehow. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He turned toward his shelter, the morning light touching his face. Life would go on, quietly, simply, beautifully. And somewhere out there, among the stars, the beings he once saved were flying freely, just as they were meant to. He whispered softly to the wind, almost like a prayer. "Thank you for remembering me." And though the sky was empty, he could have sworn that far away in the distance a faint, familiar hum answered back, gentle and full of peace.